Greetings, family. Our topic for the day, as you return to the YouTube channel, we call it the Learning Channel. It's almost like taking the class to the people, to the community. We're going to talk about Pan-African or perish. Understanding the call for Africa for the Africans. Many people have made that call. I dedicate this topic of discussion as we course through this very important topic to Dr. John Henrik Clarke. Without his work, probably wouldn't be asking these kinds of questions. And those who know who our Jegnas is, Dr. Clarke, he has set the foundation for many scholars to understand what's going on with us as an African people. So I dedicate this to him. And one of the books that he wrote, Africa World Revolution. African World Revolution. It's called Notes for an African World Revolution. Now, the copy that I have, let me see. The copy that I have looks like this. You can go into a black bookstore and find another copy with a different kind of cover. But just the topics, the chapters. 1, Notes for an African World Revolution, sets the tone for what we are discussing here. Chapter 2, 5 Africans and their uncompromised revolutions. So he has those, some of them on the front cover there. Chapter 3, Different Roads to Freedom. We know that, but he lays it out in terms of the whole Garvey movement and what was going on and people who were going against the Garvey movement. And then chapter 4, Africa, Zionism, and Friends Without Friendship. We're going to break that down, talk about Idi Amin. And then chapter 5, colonialism and the conquest of the mind, African mind. So when we talk about those people that we consider Pan-African leaders, at the top of the list there, even though he had not gone to Africa, you see there Marcus Garvey, started the United Negro Improvement Association. If you ever read anything by Tony Martin has a book called Race First. Tony Martin has written this book to discuss the ideological and organizational struggles that Marcus Garvey went through. He had a ship line, Black Star Line, had a newspaper, Negro World. Says the Pan-African, we have to put Marcus Garvey back there in the 1920s as one of the leaders to push this movement. And then you see there at the top middle, that's Kwame Nkrumah. Kwame Nkrumah, Ghana. He wrote a book called Africa Must Unite. Africa Must Unite. I got a chance to go to Ghana and visited his the memorial for his work. He had several books that he wrote. Didn't realize that. He wrote like 30 plus books, but Africa Must Unite. So he was the consummate Pan-African leader. And for him, he helped to organize other scholars. And I'm very proud of Kwame Nkrumah because he went to Lincoln University. That's where I went to Lincoln. I went to undergraduate school at Lincoln University. So he met some scholars and some future folks like Langston Hughes and Thurgood Marshall. And so he then took it back to Africa. And so Ghana was the first country there to gain independence, 1957. And on the right side there, Patrice Lumumba. We shall never forget his work. Patrice Lumumba, there was a book written about him, The Assassination of Lumumba. And we have to deal with this one in its entirety on maybe another scale. But Lumumba was the people's elected leader of the Democratic Republic of the Congo. And his military person he picked, Joseph Mobutu, was the person that the United States government used to assassinate Brother Lumumba. But he was definitely a Pan-Africanist trying to get the country in the Congo and getting the whole collective unit of Africa working together. And you see, as we force through time, Idi Amin on that bottom part there, Idi Amin was a leader of Uganda. So he was a controversial figure, and we'll discuss him because he also was a Pan-Africanist by saying Africa for the Africans, and that's why he was vilified. In the middle there, that's Muammar Gaddafi. Muammar Gaddafi was in Libya, leader of Libya, and some really negative information that was portrayed about him, but he was also Africa for the Africans. And then we have Robert Mugabe right there on the right side to the bottom right there. Mugabe was Zimbabwe. And so we know about the whole southern part of Africa. They were colonized by the the British. So Zambia and Zimbabwe. You got this guy named Cecil Rhodes went down there and renamed the countries after him, Rhodesia. And when they gained independence, northern and southern Rhodesia then changed from Zambia to Zimbabwe. And Robert Mugabe was a leader that was saying, give the land back to the people. And he was struggling because he was not getting support from the colonial powers, of course, because he wanted to give the land back to the people. So when we say Africa for the Africans, why should that be a problem? We wouldn't want to, Europeans wouldn't say Europe for the Europeans, Asia for the Asians. So when we have Africa in the storyline, it's because of the resources. When you watch all these movies and watch all the documentations about what Africa has, it's not poor, it's rich, and that's why everybody's going to Africa. So when we talk about these leaders, Marcus Garvey, Idi Amin, Patrice Lumumba, Kwame Nkrumah, Robert Mugabe, Muammar Gaddafi, we have to start studying them. So if you can't put these names to the pictures, that means you're not learning. So we must be able to roll off our names. We know all these athletes. We know the basketball players. We know the football players, huh? We know some of the great athletes in soccer, but we don't know the names of the people who fought for our sustenance. And there's one controversial one dealing with Muammar Gaddafi, because was he a friend or was he a foe? So that's Obama there shaking hands with Gaddafi. Then you have Clinton over there, because under the Obama administration, they killed Gaddafi. And it says there, we came, we saw, he died. Hillary Clinton making a hilarious joke about the murder of Muammar Gaddafi. Now look, Muammar Gaddafi, he was actually giving money to the Nation of Islam in the past. And the United States government told Louis Farrakhan, don't you take that money. I'm going to tell an organization here, a religious organization, they can't take money from another country. So Libya was always on the, bad side or negative side of the powers of the United States. Muammar Gaddafi wrote a book called The Green Book. Green Book. Yeah, he was also trying to unify Africa. It says, Part 1, the solution of the problem of democracy. Authority of the people. So he's a socialist. Part 2, the solution of the economic problem. Socialism. And Part 3, the social basis of the third universal theory. So if you ever look at and you go watch videos on Libya and what they have, from free healthcare to free electricity to a lot of free stuff, because it made it, he used the resources for the environment for the people. The thinker, Muammar Gaddafi, does not present his thought for simple amusement or pleasure, nor is it for those who regard ideas as puzzles for the entertainment of empty-minded people standing on the margin of life. Gaddafi's ideas interpret life as it erupts from the heart of the tormented, the oppressed, the deprived, and the grief-stricken. It flows from the ever-developing and conflicting reality in search of whatever is best and most beautiful. Part 1 of the Green Book heralded the start of the era of the Jamahiriyat, that is, state of the masses. Part 2 inaugurated an international economic revolution which does away with the old economic structures and brings them down on the heads of the exploiters. Part 3 of the Green Book launches the social revolution. It presents the genuine interpretation of history, the solution of man's struggle in life, and the unsolved problem of man and woman. Equally, it tackles the problem of the minorities and the blacks in order to lay down the sound principles of social life for all mankind. So Gaddafi wasn't a bad man, especially the African people. He was a bad man, I guess, to the powers that be, the exploiters. And when you start to think about exploiters, people like John Perkins, Confessions of an Economic Hitman, they were paid to go destabilize governments. And so when you see what happened with Libya and when the United States government killed him, what happened in the northern region of Africa? Turmoil happened. Why? Because all those weapons that were originally funded and sent in that area are now being used by those entities that America had been fighting against for all those years. And now you got chaos, and maybe that's what they want, mass chaos in that part of the world. So we have to not look at the leaders as bad because America says they're bad. We have to look at them as what they were doing to make it Africa for the Africans. So here's another one that is highly controversial. That is Idi Amin. I was probably 13 years old when I heard about him and Cannibal and Idi Amin and Black and Bad. And so I guess as a youngster, you don't want to be anything involved with Africa. But Idi Amin was also a person, Africa for the Africans. And I'm going to show you, let you listen to his words rather than the propaganda of the movies that go out. So you have the rise and fall of Idi Amin, got him like a cannibal eating people. It's like, he wasn't no cannibal. The rage of a maniac, the rape of a people. So yes, there was some wars. You see what's going on in Ukraine right now. War is devastating. So to now look at him as he's the bad man, well, he's bad man for a reason. We'll deal with that. And the rise and fall of Idi Amin. So they have different portrayals, and you see the images. And then the one I saw called The Last King of Scotland that Forrest Whitaker played in. Break that down real quickly. But who was pushing these messages? It says Jews run Hollywood. So what? Well, when they're the ones that are putting out these movies, okay, so they have a little slant, a different way of explaining who these people are. So I think there's a whole proverb that when the lion is able to tell the story, then the lion will be able to be the winner versus the conqueror always telling the story. So we have to look at what is going on with Idi Amin. So the movie that you could see called The Last King of Scotland that starred Forrest Whitaker, I thought it was a pretty good film. Nice music to it. Displayed some good cultural heritage about what's going on there in that central part of Africa, Uganda. But it was kind of atrocious. I mean, just the destruction and what they showed. But it was of a fictitious Scottish doctor who was like the protagonist in the film. He was like the main person that it's centered around, but it was a novel. So it wasn't like the true story. It was just a novel. And we don't want to dismiss the things that have happened because, again, when I say reading books and hearing the storylines, there's a book called State of Blood by Henrik Clarke. Inside story of Idi Amin. He worked for the administration prior to Idi Amin and the one after, and he was in Idi Amin's administration. So I'm not going to discount the words that he said and how he felt about things, but I have to also ask, well, who published this book? You start looking at the people who published the book. Again, they want a certain storyline being told. Well, rather than me saying too much about who Idi Amin is from my perspective, we have to look at theatrics and movies, and it's really propaganda. We're going to break down this raid on Entebbe because it wasn't for Dr. Clarke breaking that down in his book called African World Revolution about what really went down with that raid on Entebbe when they said there were some Israeli hostages were taken there in Uganda by some Palestinian freedom fighters. So Dr. Clarke breaks down what was going on there, but I want you to hear a little bit of Idi Amin's words, what he was saying about his country and not being exploited. Let me see if I can show this for you. So when you hear the person's words, it makes a big difference.
What do you want?
In terms of
what a job that I don't
really should be thinking about a person versus the images that others are trying to tell you to listen to.
I came so close to the Arab because Arab found that I am most influential leader in Africa, and also I am a leader who speaks the truth.
Did your Muslim religion take part?
They're undergoing training now, 3 months.
Here's one thing you need to do before you start your whole.
So when you listen to the words of someone, you hear what they're actually saying and who they are versus the interpretation. So he mentioned the Organization of African Unity. And as you know, Malcolm went to Africa and he came to the United States to create the Organization of African American Unity. So Malcolm met with many of these Pan-African leaders. He was trying to do the same thing that they're doing in Africa, to align what they're doing there on the continent to what's happening here in the United States. And there is where the rift becomes. Because where do you stand? Just because you're standing for your people on the continent of Africa does not mean you support your position to be an American because you were born here. But when you start looking at people that are exploiting your community, you saw him. Amin was shaking hands with Fidel Castro. Fidel Castro was looked at as a bad person. Why? Because they went against the powers that be, the capitalistic enterprise, because they were about their people having. And so anybody that goes against the enterprise is looked at as the enemy, and they're going to be vilified. So that's why Idi Amin was vilified. They tried to position him like he's going where Hitler went. He wasn't talking about Hitler. He wasn't doing what Hitler was doing. He was just saying that's past history, has nothing to do with him. He was saying that he was trying to do what he could to make sure his economy thrived. So now we look at this situation. When you start looking at Idi Amin, and then the world and politics, there was a movie called Mississippi Masala. Denzel Washington starred in that. Perhaps you've seen it, perhaps you have not. But Mississippi Masala was about how the mixture of black people and Indian people there in the southern part of the United States were, not too commingled, but here they had this little love interest between Denzel and the Indian woman, and now they're kind of getting together, but the Indian family was despising the relationship. Why? Because that Indian family was part of the people that were removed from Uganda when Idi Amin said, Asians get out, Israelis get out. He said, all those people who are exploiting our community, get out. So now you see a movie like Mississippi Masala, and you may not understand why that was going on in that southern part of the United States, but this is now in all our communities where we have people who may not look exactly like us that are in our communities, exploiting our communities. So there's nothing that we do about it today in our community, especially here in the United States, when you have people that are not the same as you in your community, running the convenience stores, running the states of commerce, running the places where money is being exchanged. And so Idi Amin was saying in his country, that's not going to happen anymore. So he becomes an enemy. Well, Robert Mugabe did the same thing. So he becomes the enemy. Enemy to who? Enemy to those who aren't trying to have Africans think for Africans. So here is I'm not going to have some time here. You can go look up this on your own, but the expulsion of the Asians from Uganda in the 70s. So there's a YouTube presentation explaining what happened. And if you think about back in 24, back there in Europe, the expulsion of the Moriscos, when the Europeans got rid of the Muslims and the Jews out of Portugal and Spain in that area. I mean, the expulsions happen all the time in history. So why is it looked at bad now where you have somebody saying, look, we want Africa for the Africans, so we're not exploited? So if you have some time, I don't want to do that here, but go ahead and look at the way that was occurring, and he was standing on his firm ground of why he had this position. Now, in the Congo, there's a leader, we talked about him already, Patrice Lumumba, but Raoul Peck did a film on him that you need to see. Raoul Peck also did I'm Not Your Negro about James Baldwin. So he's a Haitian film director. See all his films. He also did the series called Exterminate the Brutes. But Lumumba's story is so powerful because he was like the Malcolm X of the Congo. Of course, he came before Malcolm in time frame, but just in terms of the parallels. So Lumumba was the people's elected leader, but he selected his military leader to be Joseph Mobutu, and that was a big mistake because he was not in the position to help out for the people to progress. He was a plant, as in CIA plant, because the CIA had Lumumba assassinated. The book I showed you earlier, The Assassination of Lumumba. When you watch the series, That's a famous picture they have on the front where they tried to make him eat his speech that he gave at the, I think, United Nations, or when he was trying to gain independence and they got independence. He gave a speech about Africa right for the Africans. Belgians couldn't deal with that. Didn't want to hear that. So they set the stage for him to be assassinated. And so this book gives a good description of actually what happened. So we can't look at Africa being backwards because you think black people are backwards. Now they've been backwards because they've been influenced. They've been manipulated on a social level with colonialism. Okay? You think that people are free because they got their freedom, but they're still controlled economically and politically. That's not freedom. So that's really neocolonialism, not really colonialism. So check out the work by Raoul Peck and the movie Lumumba, and I showed you there's some books that you can also look at dealing with Lumumba. So Mobutu became a problem, and here is a YouTube on the complex history of Leopard or of Zaire, the leopard of Zaire. So he was a problem. So here's the Congo right there in the middle of Africa, large area, and this was controlled by the Belgians. So Belgium is a colony, but the Belgian people, I mean, it's like a little teeny dot up there in Europe, but they controlled that entire area. King Leopold II was one of the people who was killing people like they were flies. We don't talk about King Leopold. We don't talk about Cecil Rhodes, but you'll talk about Idi Amin. You'll say he's bad. You'll talk about Robert Mugabe, say he's bad, but you don't talk about these Europeans that came in and destroyed these Africans living in their own place. It was colonization. That was the game. So there in that southern region is also South Africa. Dr. Clarke shares with us that South Africa and Israel had an alliance. It makes sense. Because at the top of Africa, white people. At the bottom of Africa, white people. You got to strategically control that area of the world somehow. So if Israel is supporting South Africa and black people in the United States are trying to get rid of apartheid by saying divest from that country, do not do business with that country, but Israel is now supporting that. We have some conflicts. History. So that raid on Entebbe happened there in Uganda because the Israelis set up the air control. They knew. They set up the airports. They set all that up. So it was easy for them to go in and extract those Israeli, hostages, kill some of the Ugandans and kill some of those Palestinians and move out. So whatever was going on with the reason why there was a hijacking, it had nothing to do with Idi Amin. But Idi Amin is vilified because that's the country he was leading, but he did not create the raid on Entebbe. He didn't create that hostage situation. So the way stories are being told, we're being manipulated by not understanding the true history of the people who are now fighting for Africa, for the Africans. So we have to understand this, and if we don't, we'll be pawns in the game, continually manipulated. So, as I say, to be continually manipulated, look at this. The person who got Lumumba assassinated met with all these United States presidents. How could that be? Because you are a CIA agent or plant. Of course, you're in another country. But how could you be meeting with JFK? Eisenhower was also involved in this interest in Africa, because it's not like the United States colonized any part of Africa, but this was a way to get involved in Africa. They didn't want the Soviet Union or the Soviet Union having any power and control over this part of the world, so they had to have some inroads. So the United States got involved in Congolese politics, and that's why they had Lumumba assassinated. They also had Kwame Nkrumah, a coup against him. The United States supported that to happen. He didn't, and Nkrumah ended up going to Egypt. And that's why the Egyptian people were very consoling to him and his family, and his children also grew up in Egypt. That is Kwame Nkrumah's children. Patrice Lumumba's family was, you got to look at that. What happens to these families? You think about the King family in the United States. What happened to the children of the King family? All of them had some challenges and struggles with their father passing in this tragic way. But what do we do as a community to support these individuals, these families? Here you have Mobutu meeting with JFK, then meeting with Nixon, then meeting with Reagan, meeting with Carter, and then meeting with Daddy Bush. How could this one African leader in the middle of the country, in the middle of the continent in the middle of everything, where they have the resources. The Congo has this mineral resource called coltan, Coltan. And coltan is very important for helping out your cell phones and some electronic equipment to work properly. So you want to make sure you have a person in place that you can continue to exploit those resources. So he died like one of the third richest people in the world when he passed in the 90s. He was actually extradited and got out of, the people finally revolted and got him out of the Congo, but he ruled for too many years. You see with all these presidents, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 U.S. presidents this man was in cahoots with. That explains why we have so much disruption there in the middle of Congo. So now we look at today, and where do we stand? You got an African reporter who covers this is in December of 2022. An African reporter who covers the White House hit out at White House press secretary Karine Jean-Pierre for her hostile behavior, saying that this African reporter is saying that he's being discriminated against by this sister who's an African, representing what? The United States. Now, next week, according to this time frame in the middle of December, there's going to be a African summit here in the United States. 50 African leaders coming here. So look at all the mess going on. We got a black press secretary not allowing a black reporter to talk about black substance with black leaders coming to the country. Where do we stand? Is there really an Africa for the Africans when you have people blocking us being able to say what we want to say? So concluding here, because we can't go on too far, you have to go do the studying. You have to go do the reading. You have to go look at those documentaries and put it together. And if we don't have a way to connect the dots, that's why we become confused. We have to know the enemy, and sometimes it is us. So I know we're talking about this Wakanda forever now because it's out, but total propaganda. I was totally disappointed. Basically wanted to walk out. So when we see the storylines being told where we as African people fighting now a whole nother group of people that are colored, that is those people in the Mayan civilization. Now you got two colored groups fighting one another in this day and age, 2022. What is that all about? That's not even the enemy, us. The Mayans came to talk to the Africans and say, look, let's work this out together. Let's be allies. But no, we throw the whole emotional component in there. And that's why we then have a problem with our opportunities to work together. And this film displayed nothing but dysfunction. It could have had a whole lot of different storylines to go. But the Mayans and the whole connection with what was going on there in Central America, and now to tell a fictitious story about these people living underwater, and now you get this fight with these people who are battling one another, and it's like they shouldn't even be the enemies. It was all about, as we said, with the Congo and the coltan. You think about the avatar and unobtainium. Now you got this Wakanda and this vibranium, which is now found in other places. And all the Mayan, or those folks in the water people were trying to tell the Africans in Wakanda, let's work this out together. This is what happens. This is what happens. This is what happens when we start fighting one another. That was the perfect time when the European came into Africa. By the tribes and the cultures and the countries fighting one another, it's an easy way to slip in the back door, and that's how the whole enslavement process happens. So the way that this movie was told, total propaganda, pushing a message where the European becomes the what? It's off. I don't know why those mercenaries even came in with their heads still intact, because they came in to take the vibranium from those people who are now working in their own labs, and the mercenaries came in, and then the Africans, Wakandans, brought them into the United Nations people just to talk to them to say, look, this is what you've done. So we don't really deal with war properly. And so when we say Africa for the Africans, Africa can't even defend itself today. So we have to find ways that we can start looking at documentation and books to understand why it is that we have so many problems and confusion going on with our states of consciousness. We saw all the things that are going on in the media about what happened with our athletes and entertainers mentioning certain types of people, but unless you start looking at books to explain who the people that they're talking about are. So the Khazarian people, who are considered to be a Jewish people, but not the original Jews. You have people like the African Hebrew Israelites. Read the book. People have done the work. Act like these are mysterious topics of discussion. People are talking about things, but they don't want to really break those things down. So some people say these things are fictitious, they're not real. And it's almost like when people say they're not real, well, let's debate it. Let's discuss it. No. Burn them. Have no debate. So we have to be in a position where we control, again, our resources. And that's why it has been the theme, Africa for the Africans. So let's work that out. Peace.